BlogTalk Radio.
Welcome to the AME Food Testing Show. Today's guest, Jim Byron, CEO, Xgenex. Today's topic, United States Food Safety and Inspection Service, the FSIS, verification testing of beef trimmings for E. coli O157H7. Jim graduated from Boston College with a bachelor's degree in business administration. His career of over 30 years progressed from water treatment and industrial chemical sales, management to biotechnology, food testing systems, and food testing laboratories. In addition to several patent applications in process, Jim has authored several articles for Food Safety magazine, including articles on Listeria testing and STEC testing. In 2012, Xgenex was formed by a group of biotech executives, food industry insiders, and investors, appointing Jim Byron as CEO. Xgenex executives have strong relationships and networks with owners, executives, regulators, and decision makers in the food industry. This network includes academicians and leading consulting organizations. Xgenex is focused on bringing new technology and innovative new scientific discoveries to the food industry to advance the outdated routines, enhancing results, and improving financial performance of food manufacturers and companies working in the food industry. In its first year, Xgenex is a profitable startup with several new product development agreements in place. Current Xgenex products focus on financial software solutions, chemicals and biological solutions, test kits for food pathogens and other important contaminants, and food testing laboratories. The Xgenex website highlights some of those capabilities with additional resources being added soon. Xgenex welcomes relationships with companies that have innovative new technology that would benefit from Xgenex commercial development resources. Now, welcome to the show, Jim Byron, CEO, Xgenex. Jim, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Andy. I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you for that introduction. I'll need to work on getting that bio shortened in the future.
Well, you have a lot to deliver.
Yes.
Jim, today's topic is critical to anybody that enjoys beef. I know that I enjoy beef as well as anybody, but the question is the beef that we consume contaminated with E. coli, and the most brilliant type of that organism, E. coli O157H7? Let's start off. What is E. coli O157H7?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Andy. And let me put your mind at ease. The reason that we have all of these processes and procedures in place is to make sure that here in the United States you can sit down and enjoy a very delicious meal, including beef or produce or whatever it is that you enjoy eating, and you should feel very safe about that. To answer your question, though, E. coli is E. coli O157H7 is a bacteria that causes illness in humans. It's a specific serotype of E. coli that also has with it some characteristics that cause this bacteria to be especially harmful to people, and among people, most importantly, children and older adults. And those additional characteristics that come with E. coli O157H7 are a toxin called sugar toxin, or STX, and a attachment gene, or intimin, also referred to as EAE. And the way E. coli O157H7 works in the intestine, the human intestine, is EAE causes the bacterial cell to attach to the intestinal wall. And once EAE has accomplished that, STX, the toxin, actually begins to be introduced to the host, causing illness. And, you know, it can be very devastating. There are 62,000 cases of symptomatic E. coli O157H7 annually in the United States. Approximately 1,800 of those result in hospitalizations, and recent data show as many as 52 deaths associated. So O157H7 is a particularly nasty bacteria.
Jim, let me ask you, why is it important to screen beef prior to shipment?
Okay. Good question, Andy. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we've done everything possible to remove product that has been adulterated with O157H7 from the food supply. And really the best way to do that is to test the product before it is shipped. This does a number of things for us. It prevents entry of adulterated product into the food supply. In the case of beef, it informs the slaughter establishment about trends in their production. So if they see increases based on their test results or their screening, if they see increases in O157H7, they know that they should go back and look at their practices and determine if they need to make some improvements in their practices. It's best to test prior to shipment because that is our best chance to control 100% of whatever adulterated product was produced in that facility. It also prevents a recall. So if you can catch it before you ship it, then you will not have to recall it. And that's a really good thing, not only from a cost perspective, but from a human health perspective. And it's the most economical approach so far to addressing this issue of adulterated beef.
Jim, can you tell our audience of food production, food quality, food safety, and food security managers what are the current technologies and the processes to screen for this pathogenic organism?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Andy. The current approach or the current technology and process for screening for E. coli O157H7, for manufacturers, it's about a 1 to 2 day process. And it follows generally a route of lotting the product. So they've manufactured product into lots. They will sample from each of those lots, take representative samples. They will send those samples to the laboratory where the samples will be processed and enriched and tested. And when those sample results are negative, the laboratory will issue a certificate of analysis. So within there, the lotting is fairly straightforward. We all understand how we lot product in a food manufacturing establishment. Sampling for beef is a matter of taking a representative sample. So for a 10,000-pound lot of trim, as an example, the typical establishment will remove 60 slices of trim, pieces of trim, and put those into a composite sample. That's an N60 sample. It will weigh 375 grams, and that sample will be sent to the laboratory. Once the sample arrives at the laboratory, the sample has enrichment media added to it, and that enriched sample is incubated for anywhere from 12 to 22 hours. That allows, if there is any E. coli O157H7 in the sample, it will be present in very, very low numbers. And that enrichment allows whatever is present to increase in concentration to a level that is detectable in the test. And typically in a laboratory, they're going to use a PCR-based test that will look for very specific genetic markers of E. coli O157H7 in that sample. It will take about 4 hours to run the test, and if that result is negative, they should be able to issue a COA immediately following those test results.
Jim, can you explain for our audience what you mean by PCR? Because there are a couple varieties of PCR, aren't there?
Yeah. Polymerase chain reaction is PCR. And what PCR does is there are a number of manufacturers that make PCR test kits. Each one, though, follows the same basic process of providing reagents, primers and probes, in a prepackaged assay and equipment that is capable of running the test. And what happens is with PCR, it looks for very specific genetic sequences that match the primers and probes that are in the reagent set, and it makes copies of those very specific genetic sequences, in this case associated with E. coli O157H7, so that you end up with, instead of one copy of this genetic sequence, you end up in a very short time with millions of copies of this genetic sequence. And those millions of copies can be detected by the PCR machinery that will allow, for a test result.
Excellent. So, Jim, the USDA has a specific sub-agency. It's known as the Food Safety and Inspection Service, the FSIS. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andy. The FSIS really is an agency within the USDA that its mission is to enhance public health and well-being by protecting the public from foodborne illness and ensuring that meat, poultry, and egg products are safe and wholesome and correctly packaged. So the FSIS gets involved in food production, inspecting food production, working with food manufacturers to provide guidance, and generally assuring that food is manufactured in accordance with the laws and regulations of the industry.
Excellent. How does the USDA's FSIS test beef?
Okay. The FSIS has a very specific protocol that it follows, and that protocol is actually available on the FSIS website. If you'd like, Andy, I can get the details of how to find that for your listeners later on. Maybe we can find a way to get that out to folks. But essentially, the FSIS process or procedure for testing E. coli O157H7 is a 6-day-long stepwise analysis procedure to get to a confirmed positive result. So it initially is very much like the procedure that's used in industry. There's an enrichment step on the first day that takes anywhere from 15 to 22 hours, followed by a detection step with either a PCR or a lateral flow device. More than likely it's going to be a PCR, as we already talked about. That will happen on the second day. Normally 98 to 99% of samples are going to be negative on that detection. So those samples will be negative and that product will be cleared. If that PCR initial reaction is a positive result, then what the FSIS will do is they will take that sample and they will actually culture it and pick colonies from those cultures and do additional testing, which includes latex agglutination and additional PCR testing if necessary. And it's a very long process. If it is a positive sample after that initial PCR screen, it can take up to 6 days to end up with a final positive or negative result, depending on how many steps the FSIS needs to go through. It's interesting to note, Andy, that right now they get about a 0.6% positive rate on FSIS samples. So the percent positives that they get are very low, and when they do get a positive on the FSIS samples, that product that was sampled should be held by the establishment that produced that product. So it's really just a matter of that product has, again, been withheld from commerce. It has not entered the food supply. It just ends up being disposed of in some way other than going into the fresh meat supply.
Well, Jim, that sounds like there are a number of challenges or obstacles for the government. Number one, I would think that the intrusion of the government into private enterprise would be a challenge. Another would be that long time delay in the event of that less than 1% or plus or minus 2% chance of finding this target organism. Can you outline those challenges and others that might come to mind?
Yeah, the challenges are, there are challenges. Probably the biggest challenge, you're correct, is the manufacturer that has that product sampled by the FSIS is typically going to hold product for 1 to 2 days until they get their results back, and then they would release that product if it was negative into commerce. If it was positive, they would dispose of the product. With the FSIS, it can take up to 6 days for them to return a negative result. So holding on to product while FSIS does their work is one of the bigger challenges for the industry. It's one of those challenges, though, that everybody accepts needs to be shouldered just because of the importance of food safety. Another challenge, Andy, is actually collecting samples and having those samples arrive at the FSIS laboratory in a satisfactory condition so that the FSIS can do its work. If you look at the OIG report, approximately 50% of samples that were supposed to go to FSIS to be tested never arrive. Their success rate in collecting samples is right around 50%. So that is one of the issues that would be addressed in some of the changes that are being considered by the agency, and hopefully they'll make some changes there and have a better success rate with collecting samples and having them tested.
So you're saying that half of the government samples, where do they end up if they don't end up in the lab?
Yeah, it can be a few things. It could be that they don't ever actually get taken, is one step. So it could be that there was a task assigned to an inspector to collect sample on these particular types of products at these particular establishments, this particular establishment. And it may be that the inspector in that 30-day window was never able to collect that sample. So that sample never got analyzed. So that's one case. Another case may be that for whatever reason there was not a sufficient sample collected. Perhaps the sample arrived, it was collected, it arrived at the FSIS laboratory, and it was not maintained at the proper temperature. Perhaps in transit the sample actually leaked. So there are a number of things that can happen that would cause a sample rate or a sample success to be 50% in this case.
So, Jim, you have a great deal of experience in this process. What are some of the ways that the program can be improved?
Yeah. I think the FSIS, in response to the OIG, is actually going to be doing the types of things that, or is considering the types of things that will lead to a stronger program. They are going to switch their focus from sampling and testing all establishments equally to focusing the resources more on the areas where it is more likely that they would find positives. And in the interest of food safety, that is really an important shift. And for the most part, from the industry's perspective, it will reward folks, it will reward companies within the industry that are producing safe product. If they're producing safe product, they're going to have a lesser chance of more intensive testing by the FSIS than others within the industry who may not be as dependable. So I think that report by the OIG and the actions planned by FSIS actually, Andy, are going to do some things to improve the overall program.
Excellent. So let me see if I understand this. So if a beef producer, we're talking about a rendering plant, aren't we, that has these samples.
Yeah, actually,
if
we're
they
talking
have
about
a
slaughter facility, so a slaughter or a packing house. Rendering would be more if you had a product that needed to be, that wasn't going to be sent to a supermarket or a grocery store or a restaurant.
Oh, okay. So it's a slaughtering house.
Yep.
If they have a risk-based analysis based on the number of, or their history and their cleaning protocols and their safe protocols of production, then they would have fewer tests under this new revised protocol. Is that correct?
Yes, and actually, in addition to that, larger facilities. So the FSIS has determined through analyzing the data that very large facilities typically have fewer positives than the very small facilities. So again, more attention, more focus will be put on, as you stated, establishments that have a track record of not the best performance, and also very small facilities will see more sampling by FSIS in the future if their proposed changes go through.
Excellent. Well, Jim, I'd like to allow you to summarize our discussion today and kind of go through the major points. What is E. coli O157H7? Why is it important to screen the product prior to shipment? What are the current technologies? What's the government program? What challenges they face, and how can they be improved?
Sure, okay. Well, E. coli O157H7 is a very specific E. coli serotype. It has some characteristics that make it particularly harmful to humans, and those are sugar toxin, STX, and intamin, EAE, that are part of the genetic makeup of the bacteria. O157H7 is one of several toxigenic E. coli that are being regulated by the FSIS as adulterants. And they are important to be screened out of beef prior to shipment because that screening activity removes adulterated product from the food supply, which is really our first defense against foodborne illness. Screening prevents entry into the food supply. It also informs the slaughter establishment about trends in their production. It allows us the best chance to remove 100% of adulterated product, and it can prevent a recall, which is actually the most cost-effective economic approach to addressing this problem that we have available to us. Current technologies that are used in the industry include PCR detection, and it's actually PCR detection is used by the FSIS, which is an agency of the USDA, to do their testing. FSIS testing does go through significantly more steps when they get an initial positive PCR reaction, and that may cause some challenges to food manufacturers because while the FSIS is testing product, the establishment has to hold that product until the test results come back negative. So there is a challenge for food manufacturers when samples are taken by the FSIS that they may have to hold product for a longer period of time. Within the FSIS, they have got a very good track record of collecting data and analyzing data and making programmatic improvements. And what we're seeing right now is the OIG did a study and made specific recommendations to FSIS about how to improve their sampling and testing program. And they've got some program changes that are out for public comment right now that in the end should actually do some things for the public in removing more adulterated product from the food supply before it gets to the food supply. And for food manufacturers, packing houses, and beef slaughter establishments, these changes by FSIS should focus more FSIS resources in the areas where adulterated product is coming from. And that should result in overall a stronger position for the beef industry in the marketplace. And I think that that pretty much covers the highlights, Andy.
Jim, you have been an excellent guest today. I'd like to invite you now to review your company, Xgenex, and their products and other projects that you might be engaged in.
Oh, well, thanks, Andy. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Xgenex. We formed Xgenex in January of this year because we saw that there are opportunities within the food industry to leverage technology and innovation in ways that have not been done before. And with the Food Safety Modernization Act and the focus on food safety, we see that there are a number of things that can be done to improve and enhance the performance of the food industry in the areas of food safety. What we typically do is we work with inventors and entrepreneurs and companies that are trying to bring new technology into the food industry, and we give them a springboard. We provide them with consulting and resources and strategy advising that allow these companies to enter the food industry and begin to enjoy bringing new technical solutions to the industry. Our 4 areas of focus are software solutions. We've got some financial solutions online at Xgenex.com. Chemical solutions. We've got some really interesting antimicrobials that, and everybody we've talked to so far has been very interested to explore these persistent antimicrobials. We are working with test kit manufacturers who are bringing some very innovative new test kit technologies to the food space. And then finally, we're going to be opening laboratories. We're working with some folks right now to establish a laboratory network, and you should begin to see that become more visible within the food industry in the second half of 2013.
Well, Jim, sounds like you have quite a bit going on. I'd like you now to summarize your comments for today and allow you a few minutes to express any other projects or programs you might be envisioning in the next short-term future.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. The topic of our discussion today was E. coli O157H7 in the beef industry, and that is a very important consideration for folks in the industry, testing for O157H7. The industry also needs to and is focused on non-O157 E. coli that are pathogenic. And there are 6 that are now regulated by the FSIS in addition to O157 that industry is testing for. In addition to industry is looking at Salmonella as a up-and-coming pathogen that will require more attention from industry in the future. These are the things that in our industry we are looking to the future and trying to identify what are the things that we will need to address in the future. In addition to O157 and the other STECs that are regulated and Salmonella, we see there's a tremendous need for solutions that will allow food manufacturers to gain the upper hand when it comes to managing these pathogens in the food production environment. And it's our plan to bring some of these new solutions to the industry in the very near future.
Well, Jim, the purpose of the AMA Food Testing Show was to highlight new technologies, particularly emphasizing test and release programs, rather than what I've termed as ship and pray. We pray that it doesn't get anybody sick.
Right. Yeah.
So I'd like to thank you for your time today, Jim, and wish you a good day.
Well, thank you, Andy. And one last thing, if your listeners would care to sign on to www.xgenex.com, there are some articles that I've written for Food Safety Magazine that if they just click on the Contact Me button on our website and then follow that through to the LinkedIn icon, they'll be able to access some of those articles that they might find interesting and informative.
Great suggestion. Jim, could you tell us what some of the topics are? So it might pique the interest of some of our listeners.
Yeah, actually one of the articles you'll find there is on STEC testing, and I wrote that cover story for Food Safety Magazine earlier this year, before STEC testing was implemented by the FSIS, and it goes through some of the challenges of the different test methods and why it is so challenging to develop a test method, to market a test method for the STECs. Another article that they'll find, that your listeners will find there, is on Listeria testing and some of the details associated with Listeria testing, how to choose a Listeria test method, some of the considerations that every food safety manager should consider in the process of making those important decisions.
Jim, you've been a valued guest.
Thank
If
you.
in the future you can think of a topic that would be of interest to our thousands of listeners, I'd invite you to contact the show and expedite your appearance again. You've been most informative today.
Well, thank you, Andy. I appreciate your having me, and I appreciate your listeners giving me the opportunity to speak to them. And if I can be of any help to anyone, please feel free to contact me.
Well, your contact information is in the website for the AME Food Testing Show on Blog Talk Radio. Well, Jim, you've been most gracious with your time. I'll allow you back to your corporate duties and wish you a great day.
Thank you, Andy. Same to you.
Bye now.
See you.